And you're very welcome. This is The Beautiful Truth with Fintan Dunn. Thanks for joining me, folks. We're live here with the protests in Paris on Saturday the 8th of December, just around 5:40 p.m. Paris time, not yet noon in the United States. And it's been a quieter day, partly because of the lack of debris and burnable material around the city centre in order to fuel the barricades, which are so spectacular, obviously visually, but it has been a quieter day today. Nevertheless, the protest numbers are quite high. We're looking at something around about 90% of what we had last week in the regions. I'm not so sure about the central Paris area, how numerous that is compared to the previous protests, but I'd say the numbers are down in Paris. Nevertheless, the lack of spectacular violence is perhaps a win for the protesters, and you're seeing a live stream here now from Russia Today, as their coverage has been pretty good. Multiple cameras now from Russia Today, switching between them, and to bring us what really has been a scene of running skirmishes between protesters rather than face-offs across burning barricades. The high number of arrests also served to dampen some of the more aggressive protesters' actions early on in the day. Around about 700 protesters had been arrested by 2 p.m. French time, and that's double the number which had been arrested in the entire protest last week. So as we watch this, and I'm watching it with you now live, as we watch these scenes, as I say, which are more orderly, this reminds me more of an occupation, but rather than, if you like, a confrontation aiming at victory, it's more of an occupation of a public space this is turning into. But we're watching the scenes here now on Russia Today, and it's worth remembering, and I'm just going to bring you perhaps it's not a perspective that you've heard nothing about, but certainly one you've heard not enough about. And that is that the protests here in Paris are very much the tip of an iceberg. They're very much to let the elites in Paris know what it is that's going on out in the countryside, and the discontent that people are experiencing in the lower working class and middle class in Paris indeed, and outside Paris in particular, where they're coming to make their feelings known and coming to the centres of power because the protests in the rural areas don't have sufficient visibility. However, those protests really were the seedbed of this. I'll quote from something on US News that the 700 communities, which were the first 700 communities to see these protests, that the vast majority of those, in fact, were in small towns and areas with between 20,000 and as little as 5,000 persons. So that's the seedbed of this, if you like. It's also, I suppose, it's a class element to this as well. We're seeing the well-heeled Parisian elites and well-heeled Parisian leftists, gung-ho for climate change, global warming and all the rest of it. And this is an ideology which really has been relatively cost-free, relatively I say, because in carbon taxes, although they have been a pain in the ass, they're nothing like what is imagined in order to move us forward to this carbon tax heaven, which the politicians were looking forward to. I've just lost a live stream there now. I'm going to see if we'll see if we can get that coming back here now. We'll wait for them to come back on that. They'll probably switch. But while they're doing that, let me just bring you up to date. I mean, we have a vow from some of the protesters to stay till Christmas, by the way. But I'll just read you some of this. France's previous blue-collar movements were traditionally affiliated with left-wing parties and workers' unions, while its socially conservative movements have been linked to the right and religious groups. Now, the Yellow Vests are an amorphous group from different political leanings, including socialists, communists, conservatives, far-right extremists, anarchists, and even centrists who identify as former Macron supporters. So, as this has been pointed out, they are, like Macron himself famously portrays himself as neither left nor right. These people are neither left nor right. And you may be seeing the beginnings of, I suppose you'd have to call it a new centrism, really, is what we're seeing here. and even the New York Times gets it. A New York Times report described the protesters as men and women who rely on their cars to get to work and take care of their families, including small business owners, independent contractors, farmers, home aides, nurses and truck drivers who live and work primarily in rural towns and in the suburbs or ex-burbs of France's big cities, many earning just enough to get by. Well, you know, just enough to get by really comes to the heart of all this, doesn't it? And the Star the newspaper has a terrific article on this. I'll link in the comments to this video so you can read it all yourself or pass it to friends. But I'm going to read you quite some chunks of it here. And we'll see this isn't really about France, because you're going to recognize where you live. And you're going to recognize your life circumstances, and you're going to recognize the life circumstances of the people you know who live in rural areas or who are currently out of the so-called labour market or in it and not able to make a living. At the bare bottom of Florian Doux's shopping cart at the discount supermarket, there was a packet of $6 sausages and not much else. It was the end of last week and the end of last month. And at that point, quoting him, he says, "My salary and my wife's have been gone for 10 days. How to survive those days when the money runs out and when his paycheck arrives for his work as a warehouse handler has become a monthly challenge." So this guy is running out of money on the 20th of the month. He works as a warehouse handler and they're starving for the last 10 days of the month. This is what it's about. You know. So he used what money he had left and drove 250 miles to join the fiery protests on Saturday in Paris, where the police moved in with tear gas, water cannon and rubber bullets. "We knew they were sent in to get rid of us," he said the day after. And believe me, they were not into Mr. Nice Guy. But he vows the protesters aren't going anywhere. And you know, he's typical of it, and there are others who have that same life experience. The stories of Mr. Doux's neighbours also joined the protests, and they were much like his own. Inside Laetitia Depourtoux's freezer were hunks of frozen meat, a twice-a-year gift from her father, farmer, and the six-member family's meat ration. On these cold nights, the oven burns wood chopped himself because he can't afford to put on the gas heating. It's not deep poverty, but ever-present unease in small cities, towns and villages over what's become known as the other France, away from the glitzy Parisian boulevards that were the scene of the rioting this weekend. "We live with stress," Fabrice Giardin, excuse my French, a former carpet layer who now looks after other people's pets to get by. At the end of every month we say, will there be enough to eat? They're school bus drivers, nurses, out-of-work electricians, housewives, warehouse handlers, part-time civil servants and construction workers on disability aid. Mr. Doux says his 9-year-old son's never been on vacation. Mr. Doux says his 9-year-old son's never been on vacation. And his gross salary of €1,300 a month, about $1,500 just shy of, disappears immediately in the bills. There's little left after high taxes and costly utilities, such as electricity. So you see the people underneath those yellow vests there. Those are the kind of lives either they have, or their friends have, or their father has, or their mother has, or their sister has, or their brother has. And they are not unique to France. They are all over. They're in Germany, in the German slave class, paid pittances. The new model of neoliberalism, by the way, convert between 10 and 25% of your population into a slave class, depending on how ruthlessly neoliberal you'd like to be. And those dynamics are going on in the United States, they're going on in the UK, which is leaving the EU. So this is a failed economic and political system, which is now so disconnected from reality that merely on the threat and fear of something happening in 20 years' time, an elite is in power which is prepared to destroy the lives of people today, for fear, allegedly, of what might happen down the line. Now, you can get science to prove anything. You just have to come up with the money, and the scientists will tell you black as white. This ain't the old days, back before science was turned into a business and it used to pursue the truth. No, this is the new science where you can buy science. You can buy it to say that statins are good for you. You can buy it to say that stomach acid blockers are a good idea, even though the science behind them and behind climate change is merely purchased. So what you're seeing is as a result of something that isn't even a pressing economic issue. Wildfires in California happen because you don't maintain forests, not because the world's got so hot that everything's starting to go on fire. This is simplistic nonsense. And it has been without cost. You know, when you march down the street protesting that you want to see climate change being tackled, the elites could give a flying exactly. But if you were to march down the streets saying that you wanted the environment that you're seeing being destroyed all around you to be protected, that you wanted something done about the kind of soil destruction that our current agricultural practices are inducing, or any other really pressing political issues like the use of Roundup in farming, you see, those are issues that you might focus on if you weren't being distracted into what might happen in 20 years' time if we don't make a load of Wall Street people very wealthy to protect us against that happening. So let it be said that when neoliberalism finally hit the wall, that it hit the wall over something that was actually just a cult within neoliberalism, a cult it had cultivated for its own ideological and political reasons, and of course in order that very well placed French and German high technology firms can sell you a load of new energy products you don't fucking need, which will produce electricity twice as expensively as it currently is, and a project and a plan which will overall cut your existing screwed living standards in half again in order to justify this global warming ideology. So that's why it's going down. And it seems fitting that it should go down over this issue. Because if they lose here in France, it's game over. For the global warming crew, it's game over. Climate change, sorry, I keep forgetting to call it climate change because of the fact that things aren't warming anymore, so now it's getting colder. But that's equally bad. I notice every day as well too, it gets really, really, really dark. I get very worried. I'm quite relieved the next morning when I see the sun coming back up. I'm thinking of joining an environmental movement. Right. That's about it for this live edition tracking events in Paris today. I'll be back with more on breakfornews.com. If you like the channel, just subscribe or go to breakfornews.com for the latest. Have a good one. And I'll see you soon. Bye for now.